We begin Denver 7 News at 11 with breaking news. Denver police are giving us an update right now about a police shooting in Lodo over the weekend where 5 bystanders ended up in the hospital. Police say they were shooting at a suspect who they say had a gun. Now, we anticipate Denver police will show some video from this incident, so we do want to warn our viewers that may be graphic in nature. Let's listen in live now from Denver Police Headquarters.
We were in a position that was essentially perpendicular to the front side of the beer hall. So the street side of the beer hall was perpendicular to where the officers were facing. This building was directly behind the subject at the time. When the muzzle of the handgun was pointed in the direction of the 2 officers on Larimer Street, they feared the subject was preparing to shoot at them, and one officer fired 4 rounds, another officer fired 2 rounds at the subject. At the same time, a 3rd officer who followed the subject around the vehicle and onto the sidewalk also observed the firearm and recognized he was pointing that firearm at the officers who were on Larimer Street. The officer feared for the safety of the officers who were on the street and fired 1 round at the subject. This officer was aware there were individuals behind the subject and worked to obtain a clear sight picture of the subject before firing the single round. The officers quickly rendered aid to the injured subject and immediately recognized additional people who were south of the subject towards 20th Street who had been injured. There was initial confusion in the number of people who were injured because not all were transported from the scene by ambulance. Some victims left on their own and later obtained medical treatment. Additionally, on the night of the incident, there were reports of walk-in gunshot victims at area hospitals, and it took time to determine whether the injured individuals were associated with the incident on Larimer Street. Yesterday, a 6th victim contacted the police department and reported he was near the food truck vendor on Larimer Street and sustained a minor injury to his chest during the incident. In addition to the subject, 6 people have reported being injured during the incident, 3 adult males and 3 adult females. The injuries range from superficial cuts and possible graze wounds to more serious arm, shoulder, and leg injuries. We're deeply concerned for those that were injured during the incident and are working to provide all available resources and support to them as they heal. Investigators and victim services personnel remain in contact with those needing assistance. The information that I have from medical staff indicates that these victims have all been released from the hospital and continue to recover at home. I want to take a minute to specifically acknowledge and briefly describe the injuries as we know them. Again, all individuals were adults. There was a male who suffered a serious arm injury, a female who suffered a serious leg injury, another female who suffered a serious shoulder and arm injury, a female suffered a graze wound to her leg, a male suffered a graze wound to his foot, and a male suffered a burn-type injury to his chest. At the scene, investigators recovered a black Rock Island semi-automatic 10mm handgun. The firearm was loaded with 1 round in the chamber and 7 in the magazine. The hammer on the firearm was cocked back. Body-worn camera documented the subject possessing the firearm, and there is no evidence that the subject discharged the firearm during the incident. Through the investigation, it was determined that 3 Denver police officers fired a total of 7 rounds. Investigators have met with victims and are working to understand their exact location at the time that the shots were fired. Today, I'm not able to conclude specifically what struck each of the individuals that resulted in their injury. Given the nature of the injuries and lack of ballistic evidence, it may be difficult for us to offer conclusive evidence at any time regarding the projectiles that struck each victim. The suspect in this case has been identified as 21-year-old Jordan Waddy. Mr. Waddy was transported to an area hospital by ambulance for treatment for multiple gunshot wounds. He remains in the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Mr. Waddy is being held for investigation of felony menacing and possession of a weapon by a previous offender. The Denver District Attorney will ultimately determine the formal charges Mr. Waddy will face. The officers who responded to the incident were equipped with body-worn cameras. All officers were wearing Denver police uniforms. The officers who discharged their weapon are assigned to the Patrol Division in District 6, and the 3 officers have been with the department for 3 years. None of them have been involved in a prior police shooting incident. The investigation of the critical incident is being conducted by the multi-agency investigative team of the Colorado Department of Public Safety agencies, the Denver Police Department, and the Denver District Attorney's Office. We've interviewed numerous people. I know there's a lot of video out there of the aftermath of this incident. If there's any additional video of the incident itself, we are requesting you provide it to the Denver Police Department, or Crime Stoppers can be provided anonymously. I'll go through some brief slides and then address any questions. This is an officer's body cam shot, we are in the 2000 block of Larimer. The officers have come on the street side. Again, Mr. Waddy walked through the crowd on the sidewalk, and the officers did not want to walk into the crowd and endanger. They walked on the street side and contacted Mr. Waddy here. In this photograph, Mr. Waddy has his left hand in his pocket at this point, and he's in the Nike hoodie. Again, vehicle traffic is closed, pedestrian traffic is light in this area where they they decided to make the contact there. Mr. Waddy does not comply with orders to stop, and he walks and moves himself back onto the sidewalk between the Mercedes and the SUV there. This is a still frame shot from one of the officers. The officer on the right is an involved shooter in this incident. This provides a picture of the backdrop of the officer at the time that the shots were fired. The other thing that's noted is Mr. Waddy is removing that firearm from his hoodie there. He's grabbed it on top and he's moved the muzzle right in the direction of the officer who's present there. And that the officer's, in the next couple frames, fires his weapon. This is a photograph of the officer, from the camera of the officer who followed the offender, Mr. Waddy, around the SUV. He too recognizes that Mr. Waddy has retrieved a firearm and that the officers who are directly in front of him are in jeopardy, and he fires one round. As I described, we recovered a 10mm handgun. This handgun was the firearm that was possessed by Mr. Waddy during the incident. It was a loaded and appears to be a functioning firearm. Can answer any questions you may have.
Can you say how many of the bystander victims definitively had a gunshot wound?
That's something we're working towards. I can't say specifically. There are through and through injuries, so we don't have ballistic evidence to compare. It's possible that one of the rounds that hit another object sent debris or something into motion and struck somebody too and caused an injury.
How many through and through injuries?
I'm aware of one specifically on one of the female victims, and I'm not clear. I haven't had a chance to review the medical reports from Mr. Waddy to see if he has any through and through injuries.
Commander, there's been a lot of concern and questions from the community about officers firing at this time, and the number of people that were on the sidewalk and the number of people who got hurt. What kind of training do police officers have, and did they have to shoot at that time and injure those other people?
Well, certainly they didn't go in with the intention of injuring other people there. They were trying to mitigate the threat, did the best they could initially to contact the subject in the street at a safe location. Mr. Waddy moved back and then began grabbing the firearm, and the officers were in and wanted to mitigate that as quickly as possible so nobody else got injured. The training is specific to be aware of your target and beyond. The officers are accountable for the rounds that they fire, certainly. And that's a huge part of the training. So they were working, you saw the two officers in the backdrop that they had as they fired to, it would have been the backdrop of the beer hall. The other officer recognized that there were people beyond the subject, which was concerning, and he took specific attention to make sure he had a clear sight picture of the subject when he discharged a single round, attempting to prevent injury or the other officers from being injured.
Commander, based upon...
Just a quick thought, sorry.
Go ahead.
Why didn't they try to engage him and stop him when he was in the middle of the street and perhaps clear of the crowd? Why didn't they stop him at that point?
Well, and they did try to stop him. They tried to contact him, and then he did not comply with their orders. And there was nobody, the officers didn't go through the crowd. There was nobody on the sidewalk to force him back onto the street, so he had clear path back onto the sidewalk. He certainly could have gone the other direction and fled, but he chose to stay in that area, pull a firearm out directly in front of the police officers.
Commander, based upon what you know, you talked about 7 shots, 3 officers. Were all 7 shots justified?
Every officer articulated a specific threat that he was responding to, either a first person or a third person defense. The two officers were specifically defending their own life. They felt that they were in peril and that the subject could have fired upon them. The officer on the sidewalk observed the subject pointing the muzzle of the firearm at the two officers on Larimer and fired in their defense.
Did officers warn the people around what was going on, or?
They did not. They did not have time to make notification of their intention to shoot, to attempt to clear the area any further. It happened very quickly. This happened, he goes around the back of that vehicle onto the sidewalk there, and the shooting incident occurs in 2 seconds. He goes around, and 2 seconds later, the shooting is done.
Can you tell me the time code of the initial contact with the suspect, and how long did it take for the officers to fire?
I'm probably going to have to give you follow-up on that offline.
So, why show skills from this and not the full body cam video?
Sure. We're trying to put context to it. There's certainly been a couple narratives surrounding this incident. The one is that the subject wasn't armed, and that's not the case. The other that the officers indiscriminately fired into a crowd, and the officers were mindful of the crowd, and two officers had a backdrop which was nowhere near the crowd. The body-worn camera will be released. It's part of the investigation. The district attorney will complete their review of it, and then the department will release the body camera.
Wouldn't the full body camera have the full context?
At this point, we're at a point where we're putting context to it and offering to answer some of the questions and the statements based on what I'm telling right now. So again, the cameras will be released at some point.
And you said the two officers who were facing the beer hall, were the suspect, was there anything behind them there? Was this the image from that?
Correct.
So you were saying there's no one behind him, they had no fear of people behind the suspect?
The officers were pretty clear that they had a clear shot and that the backdrop was the brick pillar or the interior of the beer hall, which had been cleared out because the bar push had already occurred.
Did that third officer strike the suspect with that one round?
I don't know, and I'm not sure I'll be able to ever tell you because he's obviously the victim that individual is still in the hospital. I'm not sure what surgical intervention and what efforts the hospital has made if they're going to remove any projectiles from him.
Where were the gunshot wounds on Mr. White?
I haven't seen his full medical records. We are waiting for those to come back, but I am aware that he was shot in the lower part of his body and the lower part of his chest abdomen area. I just know that from seeing body cam. I don't know specifically though.
Do you know how many times he was shot?
I don't yet. I'm still again waiting for medical records.
Okay, so you have been
Commander, did
watching
all
live
7
as
shots
Denver
follow
police give us an
department policy?
update on this police shooting that happened Sunday early morning in lower downtown. We now know a 6th victim, innocent victim, was injured as a result of that shooting. Police were on patrol as the bars let out. There was a fight. Police identified themselves. A suspect fled, allegedly then pointed a gun at officers. That gun, ultimately, we just learned, was a real gun and it was loaded. We learned that one officer fired 4 rounds, another fired 2. A third officer then fired a single round. So 3 total police officers, Denver police, fired a total of 7 rounds, striking this suspect, again, and injuring now 6 other people, 3 adult males, 3 adult females. All have been released from the hospital. Police, again, recovered that loaded gun on scene. Police do not know, or at least could not tell us at this point, what struck each of those individuals and if they were, in fact, hit by bullets or shrapnel or any kind of other objects or projectiles in the area. They did show us some still frames of some body cameras that officers were wearing. They did not show us the video. They said that would be released at a later date. One of the questions that Artoni Kovaleski asked, the police responded to saying the 2 officers who fired said that, or at least claimed, they were defending their own lives. A third officer was defending those other police officers. Of course, this is a story we're going to be following all day. You can find updates, our previous stories right now on thedenverchannel.com. If you'd like to continue watching that live streamed presser, you can do that on thedenverchannel.com. We're also expecting to hear from a victim of that shooting. We'll hear from them on Denver 7 News at 6 o'clock, and we'll be right back.